For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sonya Meline. I want to wish you the ultimate gratitude for being here today. It is not often that we get to deep dive this heavily into a compliance regulation, but with what is happening with Change Healthcare attack, dubbed the most significant and consequential cyber attack in American history, which began 73 days ago, right in the middle of February, against United Healthcare Group's Change Healthcare. This has impacted financial operations, crippling hospitals, insurers, pharmacies, and medical groups, and lots of other healthcare adjacent companies nationwide. This means that the healthcare industry is experiencing a pivotal moment. Critical vulnerabilities have been unearthed, catapulting proactive cybersecurity into the spotlight where it rightfully belongs. In response, DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services, has rolled out letters that strongly point to new cybersecurity performance goals, which will make an acronym, CPGs, that significantly raise the cybersecurity bar, surpassing the requirements of HIPAA. So I think it's funny, leave it to HHS to send out a strongly worded email years before they actually implement regulations. But hey, this is still progress in the world of cybersecurity and compliance. So not only that, HHS is gearing up to update the HIPAA security rule that's supposed to come out later this year, probably take effect in 2025, which will introduce new cybersecurity mandates and will likely incorporate these CPGs. That's big news in the world of compliance and cybersecurity because HIPAA updates don't happen often. So given the Change Healthcare breach, along with the alarming surge in healthcare data breaches of 2023, healthcare organizations are now more than ever that they need to act. So here's where we step in. Brooke Johnson, Andrea Olson, our marketing team, and I have joined forces together with Dan Wolfford, Damian Semon, Jonathan Krasner, to put together a quick overview of the CPGs. We promise that we'll cover each of these, offering actionable steps for your customers and the healthcare providers that you serve, and to swiftly achieve compliance with these and to bolster their defenses. Additionally, we'll delve into the enhanced goals, because there's the essential and then the enhanced, and we'll briefly touch on these to talk about how you can future-proof security for your customers. So let's jump right in. Everyone can see my screen okay? All right, cool. My name is Sonya Meline. Like I said, I am certified in healthcare compliance by the HCCA and the Vice President of Business Development for Blue Team Alpha. Excited to be here today. We also have on with us subject matter expert and our Chief Information Security Officer, Mr. Dan Wolfford. We also have Mr. Damian Semon Jr., penetration tester for Blue Team Alpha. All right, and then we have Mr. Jonathan Krasner, our Director of Strategic Alliances and a subject matter expert in HIPAA as well. We'll jump right in. We're going to talk about this attack and its implications. Then we're going to talk about the enhanced as well, and I'm sorry, essential first, then the enhanced breakdown of the CPGs. And then we're going to talk about how Blue Team Alpha can help as your trusted security partner to help you with your customers. So as you know, if you don't know, Blue Team Alpha's mission is to secure and defend the digital world, acting with integrity, compassion, excellence, and duty. We have a lot of different services we offer. Incident response is one of the core services, as well as SOC as a service, vCISO, email hardening, penetration testing, data recovery, endpoint defense, risk assessments, compliance, training, and phishing. So let's talk about this study. This study was done by the Internet Crime Complaint Center, the IC3, which is headquartered by the FBI. It surveyed more than 2,825 complaints, or it compiled the 2,825 complaints. And remember, these are just complaints of ransomware alone, and there's probably a lot more ransomware cases that did not get reported to the IC3. But of those that did get reported, you can see down at the bottom that healthcare and public health was the #1 target of ransomware as reported by the FBI. So big concerns in ransomware, and they're just getting bigger. So that's what we're seeing, unfortunately, and that's why, big part of why we're having this conversation today. So let's talk about this attack and kind of how it went down. And then after that, we'll talk about sort of the hacker's viewpoint on that. So let me go ahead and hand this off to Mr. Dan Wolfford.
Thank you, Sonya. Yeah, in the early days of ransomware, back 2015 and before, these cyber gangs were not targeting healthcare. They weren't targeting hospitals. They didn't want to hurt anyone. It was purely for profit. And when they did hit a hospital by accident, because they're just looking for open ports that they can gain unauthorized access to, most of the time they would apologize and say, we didn't know it was a hospital. Here are the keys. We're not trying to hurt anybody. Obviously, things have changed. This change healthcare actually did hurt a lot of people. We dug into it. We read more than 20 different reports that are out there to try to understand how it happened. And then what could we have done as Blue Team Alpha to prevent something like this from happening from one of our customers or any of our partners or any of their customers? How can this be prevented? So we have to understand the attack. Based on all the information that we were able to find from reading all of these various reports, there's not a lot of technical details about the attack, but I'm going to share what we found and what most likely happened. So the attack first started, well, first of all, I'll say this was a triple extortion attack. So originally, a cyber attack was just one attack, and then companies got really good at recovering from backup. So then they did a second type of attack. Now this Change Healthcare a triple extortion attack, and I'll explain why. So the first attack started on February 12th. This was way before it was reported or anyone ever knew about it. The cyber criminals were in the network for at least 9 days, and their primary goal was getting a foothold in the network and stealing as much data as they could. And it looks like, based on the reporting, they gained access to at least 4 terabytes of private health information, source code, applications, healthcare data, and 4 terabytes is a lot. Change Healthcare has said that it affects a substantial portion of people. We're guessing maybe half of the U.S. population are affected by that breach. So that's the first attack, is where it's data theft. Now, the second attack is the ransomware. That happened on February 21st. That's when everybody knew that Change Healthcare was under attack. Their systems, all the files get a password on it. Systems are locked down. The business comes to a grinding halt at that point, and then they start triage and doing their incident recovery. Now, according to the reports, the victim did decide to pay the ransom. I did some blockchain analysis, and I was able to find the ransomware payment. It was 350 Bitcoins that was paid from one source. It went to this criminal gang, Alpha V, also known as Black Cat. And then from there, it was moved around, and eventually it made its way into Binance, which I thought was surprising. The CEO of Binance had to pay a huge $4 billion fee to the Department of Justice. He was actually indicted and arrested, and he's awaiting the result of his trial. He's probably going to jail. Unrelated to this, Binance was known to facilitate a lot of ransomware payments, a lot of money laundering. So that was not too big of a surprise. Now, what was a surprise was the third attack. So this happened approximately on April 15th. Another group called Ransom Hub got access to the data somehow. There's some ideas about how they got access to it, because ransomware works with affiliate groups, different groups working together to do the total attack. So Ransom Hub got the data and then started leaking it on the dark web. So leaking the stolen data, the private health information of the patients, as a way to apply pressure to the victim to pay another ransom. I wasn't able to find that second ransom on the blockchain. However, Ransom Hub took down the site that was leaking the data. That typically means that the victim has paid the ransom. So that's the triple extortion attack. And we've seen that a report that on May 1st, the CEO of United Health, the parent company of Change, is going to be discussing this in front of a U.S. House subcommittee. So how did this happen? How could this have been prevented? Based on the reporting, it looks like it was a compromised account, a username, password, credential that was used to log into a remote app that allowed employees to log on to the system, but there was no MFA. So the initial attack vector, totally preventable. If they had MFA or if they had, better access control on those remote apps. But here to talk more about this attack and others from the attacker's point of view is my amazing coworker, Mr. Damian Semon.
All right. So the main way threat actors are actually getting into networks, mostly in the healthcare industry, still the trusted, tried and true method, social engineering. So that's going to be phishing or vishing of your employees or the employees. Usually any employee that has any sort of desk work, some sort of like clerical work, if their job function requires them opening emails at a high frequency, they're at risk. That includes C-suite, where a majority of their job functions are opening and responding to emails and that sort. And then if they can't get into the actual big target network, third-party vendors. They're also trying to get into any of the third-party vendors that might be working with that hospital, that organization, and abusing that already established trust with being able to open up emails from your vendors. So like in this case, one of the methods that makes the phishing or any of these attacks successful, no MFA, unfortunately, was in the United Healthcare situation, or MFA exhaustion. So sometimes, depending on how your MFA is set up, if you just get that prompt of a yes or a no, and it just keeps coming over and over and over again, just like with the Colonial Pipeline, that had MFA exhaustion incorporated in there. So with the advent of AI, phishing is actually becoming more and more successful. Back in the day, you used to be able to tell when a phishing email was a phishing email. You could see the broken English, the foreign typed structured sentences and whatnot. But with generative AI, you can actually create pretty convincing looking emails, phishing emails. Depending on who the, I guess, corporate executive, high up doctor, whoever, if anyone ever has an interview that they did, or if there's at least 15 to 20 seconds of audio on YouTube of someone over at that organization, that audio can then be cloned and used in vishing social engineering attacks, where call up acting like you're Joe Schmo trying to get access to my emails through my personal laptop. I don't have access to my work email, that sort of thing. And then on top of that, threat actors are now incorporating trying to entice employees for initial access. So you have insider threats who are either disgruntled employees who want to sell that access for a quick payday, or just simple financial coercion. Some employees, or in some locations, I'm assuming, would have some sort of a financial need or want to sell access. Threat actors are actually taking advantage of disgruntled employees or people who are struggling right now, especially during the coronavirus or the economy that's struggling, trying to take advantage of that. So with getting initial access, a lot of threat actors and Black Cat in this situation, how they're evading antivirus and how they're going undetected is they're actually not using malware nowadays. The goal here is to use lay of the land binaries. LOL bins essentially is what they're called. Binaries that pre-exist or that come pre-installed on Windows. You're thinking Task Manager, PowerShell, CertUtil, etc. There's a number of different tools that you can use for legitimate purposes and can also be used for illegitimate purposes. A number of the tools that they're using for data exfiltration are Clone, WinSCP, for some of the enumeration stuff that they do, Advanced IP Scanner, Code Exec or Remote Code Exec. You're using PS Exec, so some sysinternal suite tools are being abused. And then a lot of C2s like Cobalt Strike aren't really being used anymore. Common RMM tools, the free version of Screen Connect or Altera or Splashtop, are getting used temporarily to maintain access inside a network. All of those, none of them are malware. All of those are signed binaries, can evade common antivirus and EDR detection. So it's usually tradecraft that needs to get picked up and detected in most cases.
Absolutely right. Thank you, Damian.
Yeah, awesome. Scary stuff. But thank you for that overview. So let's talk about the implications of this attack. Really, there are many. I don't think that there's gonna be an end to the implications that we can, even see soon. But from massive lawsuits, massive government regulations coming, there's a lot. But today, just for purposes of, concise information that's actionable, we're going to really talk about the CPGs. So those are the cybersecurity performance goals, again, that we talked about in the beginning for those of you who are joining a little later. So why these matter is because the CPGs significantly increase the baseline for cybersecurity from the minimum standards of the HIPAA security rule. Now, remember, HIPAA security rule was brought about in the age of the internet and the growth of, electronic health records and ePHI, and that HIPAA itself was in 1996, and then the security rule in like 2005. So we haven't had updates for a really long time. So I think this is a catalyst for change, and these essential CPGs significantly increase the baseline for cybersecurity. And then the enhanced CPGs aim to create a more mature cybersecurity program for healthcare organizations. These regulation updates are needed. They haven't been regulated yet. These are just, strongly worded emails like you need to do this, but without the, full force of the law behind them. That will come. But organizations can't wait, right? Like you shouldn't just wait until you're going to get fined. HHS is planning to update that rule in 2024, probably take place in 2025 when it actually goes into effect. But with the attacks on the rise, as you're seeing, the organizations that we're talking to should not wait any longer. So let me go ahead and ask you, Jonathan, as another resident subject matter expert on healthcare compliance, did you have anything to add to the attack implications?
Yeah, so HHS, which is involved in the rulemaking for HIPAA, they basically interpret the legislation and put out the rules. There's a couple of things to think about here. Number one is they know that it takes a long time to get these regulations in place. So they're talking about late 24, early 25. So they're trying to signal to people, hey, you should have these essential CPGs in place. In the past, the HIPAA regulations were kind of like vaguely worded without specific technical requirements. So now with these essential and enhanced CPGs, they're talking more about specific types of technologies and capabilities. The other thing I would add is that if you have a breach, and it happens all the time, you can look at what's called the HHS wall of shame. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. You have to report your breach, and then you're going to get reviewed by HHS on your HIPAA program. So now let's suppose you have a breach and you have 2010 HIPAA in place or 2015 HIPAA in place, and you don't have these essential CPGs in place. HHS might give you an adverse opinion when they review you for the breach, and that could lead to fines or ongoing auditing, just things that you don't want. So basically, they're trying to say as loudly as they can without having the legislative authority at this point in time, do this stuff. So look at the essential CPGs, look at the enhanced CPGs, SMBs, definitely essential CPGs, look at enhanced CPGs, and you really should be incorporating this stuff into your cybersecurity program.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's go ahead and do a breakdown of these CPGs. I'll go over each one and then we can talk about them. Let's just jump right into what these essential goals are. These will look very familiar to many of you in the cybersecurity world because we know that this should all be in place anyway. The first one is to mitigate known vulnerabilities, reducing the likelihood of threat actors exploiting these vulnerabilities to breach organizational networks that are directly accessible from the internet. I always equate, cybersecurity to a ship. Maybe it's because I was in the Navy, but if there's a hole in the ship, you want to address that right away. And that's what this very first, essential goal is addressing, looking for those vulnerabilities and then addressing them right away. The next one, email security. So I'm going to hand this one over to you, Dan.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so email security, like Damian had mentioned, Email is still the #1 attack vector. It has been for a long time. It will continue to be. As much as I would love for everyone to stop using email altogether, because it was never made with security in mind, that's probably unrealistic, for business where people are still going to use email. The big thing here is just to be aware that it is the most common attack vector. So take the email security very seriously and always be looking for new methods, new policies, new techniques, new tools regarding email security until, the attackers pivot to something else. But right now, today, that's still going to be my #1 recommendation for all companies and all sectors to make sure your email security is tight.
All right, next one, of course, multi-factor authentication, not just any multi-factor authentication. We hope it would be well implemented with the right policies in place, but this will add, if it's done correctly, a critical additional layer of security where safe and technically capable to protect the assets and accounts directly accessible from the internet. Another big one, basic training, right? Teach your team how to respond and what to do, what not to do. This is, something I'm not surprised to see on basic goals. They're often known as our human firewall. So we want to ensure that we have basic cybersecurity training in place for the customers. We want to ensure that they have strong encryption and that they use that encryption to maintain confidentiality of EPHI and sensitive data and the integrity of the IT and OT environments, whatever those might be and whatever that data is there. We want to make sure that we are taking those credentials away from the workforce if they're no longer with that organization. So, changing those to prevent unauthorized access to the organizational accounts by former work members. This includes affiliates, volunteers, contractors, third parties. A lot of times those are overlooked, but those are also really important. Basic incident planning and preparedness. This is a huge one that we see organizations missing little things that could lead to huge recovery time for them in event of an incident. We're talking organizations are down for weeks, months, like this Change Healthcare 73 days. I mean, they're still in the middle of all of this. But had they had some better incident response planning in place, that might have been a different case. Dan, did you want to briefly touch on incident response planning?
Again, this is another big one, the incident response planning, just having a plan. What is the first step? What do you do? Because a lot of times an employee is going to see some indication, and every employee, every person on the network is potentially a sensor. So if you combine your incident response plan with your cybersecurity training, then everyone knows what to do. So if they see something that is strange, they don't understand, if they see any weird activity on their machine or a pop-up or a background change or a file extension change, they're going to know how to handle it, know who to call. So speed is the primary goal whenever you're doing incident response. If you're fast enough, you can cut off the attack so you don't have data loss and you don't have ransomware. You can catch them earlier in the attack when they're just snooping around.
Absolutely. Next one is unique credentials. So making sure that each user has unique credentials. I'm a big advocate for the minimum necessary policy. I'm not seeing this on the essential goals, but that's a big one under HIPAA. But also those unique credentials, it really also helps in forensics investigations. If everyone's sharing the same credentials, we don't know how, who was the last person to touch it. So it's important that those are not shared, especially on anything that has access to EPHI. So that is a big one. And the next one we want to talk about is separate user and privileged accounts. So that is where we talk about that minimum necessary. So we don't want to have the same teammates having access to EPHI who don't really need it. Maybe they're just a front desk person or something like that, and they don't need access to that EPHI. So this is establishing secondary accounts also to prevent attackers from having access to privileged administrative accounts. So that means, those attackers, if they do get access to an account, but it's not a privileged account. They're not going to be able to get as far. So that's why you want to have those separate accounts for those privileged individuals. And then we want to talk about vendor and supplier cybersecurity requirements under HIPAA that is addressable already. Those business associates need to have policies in place and agreements in place to identify, assess, and mitigate risks associated with third-party products and services. So those are your essential goals. Before we go into the next ones, Dan wants to talk about why we would require an 11th essential goal.
Yes, this is where we disagree with HHS. We're actually more in line with CISA, Critical Infrastructure Security Agency, who recommends penetration testing as one of the basic cyber hygiene activities to do. All companies, all sectors. So if I could add a number 11 to HHS essential goals, it would be pen testing.
All right, and we might see that in the next set of goals here. So here's the enhanced. Asset inventory, identifying unknown, shadow, unmanaged assets more rapidly, detect and respond to new vulnerabilities. That's your first one. That's that asset inventory. Absolutely must have. I don't know how that could be enhanced, but again, there's some of these things where it seems like a little basic. Next one is that third-party vulnerability disclosure. So establishing processes to promptly discover and respond to known threats and vulnerabilities in assets provided by vendors and service providers. So that would be that. Yeah.
I'd like to add something to number 1 real quick.
Yeah.
Scans for what's on the network. We find things that they didn't know was there, like IoT, like sensors. When we scan an OT environment, we find things that was communicating on the network. They thought it was air gapped. So all of that is a shock, and it shouldn't be. We should be doing asset inventories on our own networks and all of our connected networks pretty much as often as possible. If you can fit it into the battle rhythm of normal operations, keep a living asset inventory, but also be aware that devices can be listening on IPv6. Even if internally you're using IPv4 and you're not expecting IPv6 traffic, devices can still have ports open and be listening to it, and we can scan for it and find devices still listening with open ports on IPv6, which is completely unexpected.
Okay, and we do have some questions. If breaches ransomware, do you tend to see in most hospitals that this comes as a result of so much privilege on endpoints, or what do you see as the primary factor? Past vendors not removing their access cleanly, etc. So who wants to take that question?
The answer to that is yes. Typically, we see business associates of the main hospital get compromised first, and then the attacker can pivot and move laterally and move up, like with a privilege escalation, into the main hospital network, which typically has better security than their business associates or subsidiaries. Like with Change Healthcare, it was a subsidiary of United Health. So that is the most common scenario. Endpoints, regarding data loss, we see the attackers basically snatch and grab everything they can touch. So they're going to try to get domain admin as fast as possible, the highest level access they can for the domain, and then just download everything. It's going to look like a massive update. It's going to look like a backup, and using something like MegaSync or rclone, and it might blend in with the victim's backup process they already use. So, just imagine 4 terabytes of data leaving the network should trigger something, but if it looks like a backup, people may not investigate it. They're like, oh, that's just a backup. So they're going to access everything. And so past vendors not removing access, yes, we have seen that before where credentials are still active. And like with Change Healthcare, credentials were used. Now, we don't know exactly if it was from a vendor or if it was from a former employee, or if it was from an employee who was phished. But most likely it was from an email attack and they were able to phish the credentials. But we don't know for sure.
Yeah.
More data should be coming out about Change Healthcare as the investigation continues. We'll be getting more information.
Yeah, and next question, this might be a little bit of a rhetorical question, but from James M as in Mike, how can you even begin to achieve the essential goals without doing a good asset inventory.
You're right. You're right.
I don't know. I mean, leave it to HHS. You know, they're trying to simplify this stuff, but yeah. All right. I do see more questions. We're going to keep rolling, but we'll try to get back to those. You guys are awesome. Thank you for asking great questions. It really helps us know we're talking to the right people here. So third-party incident reporting, establishing a process to promptly discover and respond to known security incidents or breaches across vendors and service providers. Cybersecurity testing, finally, in the history of HHS, they use the actual words penetration testing. Like, yeah, drum roll. So, I mean, it should be a requirement, right? It should be in the essentials. But they're saying here, establish processes to promptly discover and responsibly share vulnerabilities and assets discovered through penetration testing and attack simulations. So, good news, that is finally becoming a requirement to your customers. Thank goodness. And then what do we do after we do those penetration tests? Cybersecurity mitigation, establishing processes to internally act quickly on the prioritized vulnerabilities discovered through the penetration testing and attack simulations. Anybody want to comment on that before I move on? I think we all know that's so obviously necessary.
No, you covered it.
All right. All right, detect and respond. So we want to ensure organizational awareness and ability to detect relevant threats, techniques, and procedures at endpoints. Ensure organizations are able to secure entry and exit points to its network with endpoint protection. Again, some of the most basic stuff that we think every organization should have is now finally being required pretty soon. Not yet. We don't want to rush these things. The next one is network segmentation. Mission critical assets are separated into discrete network segments to minimize lateral movement by threat actors after initial compromise. Seems like an obvious thing, but I mean, that is actually a really good one to work towards as an enhanced goal. Centralized log collection of necessary telemetry from security log data sources within an organization's network that maximizes visibility, cost effectiveness, and faster response to incidents. The next one is centralized incident planning and preparedness, ensuring organizations consistently maintain, drill, and update cybersecurity incident response plans for relevant threat scenarios. And lastly, the configuration management, defining secure device and system settings in consistent manner and maintaining them in accordance with established baselines. So let me see all some questions. Oh, Dan's answering questions on the side there. That's great. So we have a question from Derek P, as in Papa. Thank you for the detailed explanation. And do most of these not have IDS, IPS implemented or any sort of network sensor, etc.?
From what we've seen, most organizations do have basic IDS, IPS. It comes pre-installed with most network devices and security solutions. However, the attackers are very good at avoiding default settings. They're very good at laying low and blending in, and they can bypass, most of those systems unless you have an active SOC team who is monitoring activity. They're looking for suspicious activity, and then they can investigate, and find indications of compromise, not hashes or domains. Those are, easily changed, but the actual tradecraft of figuring out who am I, where am I, what do I have access to, how can I escalate up to domain admin? That's the kind of stuff that if you have a proactive team looking for that, they're more likely to find and stop the attack. And most organizations aren't that high on a maturity level. They have the basics, but not like the more advanced system.
Great questions. All right, so let's talk about Blue Team Alpha real quick as your partner in these new changes, these new CPGs. So really, this is a cybersecurity performance roadmap example that we put together for a customer a couple months ago in response to the CPGs. They came to us saying, hey, we're a healthcare customer. We need to meet these new regulations. It's very rare, by the way, that the healthcare customer comes to you and says, hey, I need to meet these regulations. I wish that was sort of like the norm, but this customer really did want to get ahead of this. And so, we came up with this. These are just the next 10 months to work with them. So a statistical analysis and threat profile with a vCISO, a virtual chief information security officer for that customer. And then it also included setting up and delivering cybersecurity training, setting up dark web monitoring for that customer to mitigate vulnerabilities, and launching an anti-ransomware endpoint detection and response tool. We wanted to get that in place right away just to ensure that they didn't have, any sort of ransomware, since that is kind of the biggest threat out there that we're seeing right now for our healthcare customers. So that was all, simultaneously done in April. Moving on to May, the step will be to set up an incident response plan and incident response tooling for that customer. That's a software as a service, that's best of breed tool that we recommend for the customers. Simultaneously, and I won't repeat this every month, but we're continuing the cybersecurity training, we're continuing the dark web monitoring, and continuing that anti-ransomware EDR, as well as that vCISO service with that customer. The next one is conducting and reviewing the organization's business associate threat profiles for cybersecurity requirements. That means also really helpful for our partners, because we're looking who their business associates are, right? We're performing a threat profile on those business associates, and we're going to find some stuff, and then we're going to present those threat profiles to those business associates, and then our partners can also help them with all of their other cybersecurity goals. So it's a great way for our partners to also help a lot more customers. That'll be done in June. In July, it's reviewing their cybersecurity insurance plans, which is a big one for this customer. They're renewing their cybersecurity, and they want to look at some different vendors. And so Mr. Krasner, who leads up that department, helps this customer. Mr. Krasner, did you want to discuss kind of that thing that you'll be doing with this customer in July?
Yeah, so it's very important for people to understand their cyber insurance policies, what it covers, what it doesn't cover, and what it means if you have to make a claim under the policy. Most people just buy insurance and they forget about it. But in the case of cyber insurance, you're looking at tremendous cost to your organization, and you want to be able to perform most efficiently. And so we consult with clients to make sure that they understand all of this, and they can incorporate their cyber insurance into their incident response planning, which is very important. And I think we've talked about IRPs in other parts of the conversation today.
Awesome. Yeah. And a quick question just came in from James M, as in Mike. And James, I'm putting your name in the hat, so thank you for that. James says there's no real prevention controls beyond email in the essential goals. AV, EDR isn't even called out anywhere. Is there a set of two basic to mention controls that is just assumed to be the underpinning of the name goals? The answer to that is, James, I would like to go through these with you, because I'll send everybody the link who wants it for these CPGs. There's a plus and minus button on the website that HHS created for this. That's really actually difficult for most people to find, because leave it to HHS to make it really, little Easter eggs for you. So you have to push the minus button or the plus button, and it opens up a lot more information about each CPG. And it does go in and talk about tooling that would be essential to meet that particular goal. But great question. And again, yeah, some of this stuff they didn't really spell it out too well. But if you dig a little deeper, they like to keep things really vague, so that if you mess up, they can do lots of little gotchas. I don't know why, but that's as a compliance officer, I think that's many years of being a compliance officer. I think that's just part of what makes it interesting. So, okay, we're going to move on to stage 5 here for this customer, a phishing campaign. This is an automated phishing campaign that we deliver to them, to all users, all roles, to assess the phish-prone percentage of the users before training them. The goal of our alpha phishing campaign is not only to identify vulnerabilities, but to identify and then prioritize the security training for those individuals who do fall victim to that phishing attack. Super important. phishing is going to be like a big vector, right? Next one, stage 6, review one of the security policies. And this is, this is within this customer's budget. An ideal customer with unlimited budget, we might be reviewing all their security policies, but even just going over one and helping them build out a robust security policy could give them a really good template for their other policies. Next stage, the vCISO wants to work with them to provide an organizational review and an assessment of the email hardening plan and vulnerabilities. This customer was very concerned. They had just had some issues with email and wanted to make sure that their email vulnerabilities were addressed. The next stage was a monthly meeting with the vCISO to review their current cyber trends and goals. The next stage was a phishing campaign. This is a manual phishing campaign. It's delivered to specific users. Well, here it says all roles and users in the organization via voice, text, and phone calls to assess the phish-prone percentage of users before training them. This takes a lot of time on our end, but the results are really useful for the organization who wants to ensure that they're mitigating against these types of phishing attacks. And then, at the start of the next year, begin planning for the the enhanced goals for HHS. So that's a little bit about the performance roadmap that we put together, an example from one of our customers. Looking for other questions. And while I'm doing that, Jonathan, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I did. So
Yeah.
I believe this organization, we could probably characterize them as a mid-sized organization for context.
Yes.
About 200 users.
140. Yeah, smaller.
Yeah, right. So they're not like your country doctor family practice with 5 or 10 employees, and they're not Sutter Health with 10,000 employees. So they're in the middle there. But what you can see here is there's a lot of stuff in here. And this has been tailored to them based on what their infrastructure is, what their budget is, where their risks are. And I know that in the IT world, there's a tried and true and overused cliche called trusted advisor, right? We all use it. But in this case, really, you have the opportunity to be the client's trusted advisor, because navigating this minefield of cyber security mitigation and cybersecurity resilience for your clients really takes a very tailored approach depending upon many factors. And so, this is an illustration of that. So this, for all your healthcare clients, this represents a tremendous opportunity for you to go in and add value.
Absolutely. And hopefully be the trusted sidekick that gets ahead of this attack, because it's coming for every single healthcare customer out there. They are just chomping at the bit to get at that data. It trades in the black market for double, triple any other data out there. So it is just hugely valuable.
There's also one other thing I would add is that, healthcare organizations, especially folks that are delivering healthcare, they're like factories. They're delivering a service in real time as opposed to making something in real time. So you get, like, let's say a title company or something like that, that's just pushing around documents. If their operations are impeded for a couple of days, that's going to have an impact on them, but not nearly the same impact as if you can't see your patients, or, you can't do testing or labs or operations or something like that. So that's another reason why they want to come for you, because they want you to have a lot of pain, because they want you to pay the ransom.
Yeah,
Exactly.
thank you for being here today, and I commend everyone for taking the time out of your super busy day to learn more about this stuff and stay sharp and help your customers. So we will see you next time.